If we can just give thanks before the Lord. Father God, we just thank you that you gave us your Son Jesus to die for us. And we thank you, Lord, that you did that so that we could come into a relationship with you. Not only a relationship with you, but a relationship with one another, and especially those who love the Lord Jesus. So together, we just thank you for our meeting this morning. We ask your blessing on it. We ask your blessing on the shared fellowship that we do have. And we ask your blessing on this food that we share together. In your name, Jesus. Amen.
So we're very fortunate this morning in having Charlie Baker to come and speak. And I was just reflecting when read through Charlie's background and how he did. Spent 30 years in the Metropolitan Police. That seems, he doesn't look old enough to have spent 30 years in the Met. And just wondered whether you had any responsibility for Crusader Dick, but I'm sure you hadn't, Charlie.
I'll tell you in a minute.
And Charlie's title also has been a lot of fun, so I think we're in for an interesting morning, Charlie.
Well, good morning, gentlemen. Interesting to come to this particular coffee shop because Louise is my wife's former boss, so I knew where I was coming. Well, where do I start? The introduction, it's been a lot of fun, is because actually the police service, as you can imagine, for 30 years in London, I could probably tell a lot of really gory stories, which you really don't want to hear after your breakfast. So I'll stick to the funny ones with one or two perhaps, which may not necessarily be gory, but might make a point. But the southern-speaking northern, I probably better explain that to start with. My grandparents are from Northumberland. My grandfather lived in Jesmond, and my grandmother lived at Bowlam. And in the First World War, my great-grandfather died suddenly in the, not anything to do with the war, he just had a heart attack and died. And my grandmother then moved to London, moved to Newcastle, to the same street that my grandfather was living, and hence how they met in Jesmond. They got married in Jesmond Parish Church. So my connections to the northeast really are through my grandparents, and my mother and my father met in London when my mother went to London to teacher training college, and they met because they both went to All Souls Langham Place, the church in London which you may well have heard of. And they got married and had my two older brothers when they lived in London, and then my father, who worked for Domtar Paper Mills, who my father was definitely a southerner, he got transferred to Sunderland, much to my grandfather's disgust, because obviously my grandfather's a Newcastle United supporter, and got moved to Sunderland to sort out the paper mill that was then in Hendon, which got knocked down not that long ago. And so he got moved up here. In that time I arrived in 1966, and if you want to place that in your life history, some of you who may look older than me, if you remember the day of the Aberfan disaster, I was born the day before that, so that places it in a place of time.
I think we're going to mention the World Cup there for now.
No, I was inside my mother for the World Cup. I don't remember any of the goals. But as my father was very successful at being a troubleshooter in business, and not long into my childhood, he got transferred back to London to sort out another problem in the company. And so up sticks and off we moved. And so I ended up in London and grew up there and ended up in the police service there. My Northumberland roots really are, it's interesting, some people it matters where you come from, and some people it doesn't bother you at all. And I don't think anybody can explain why, it's just a thing. To me it really, really matters, and it always has mattered. In quite spectacular fashion at school, when apparently my mother got summoned once to speak to my teacher, because we'd had this exercise in junior school where you had to write a letter as if it was to yourself from the bank manager. And quite correctly, in my opinion, I put the address on the envelope as 5 Valbrook Gardens, Sunderland, County Durham. And my teacher had no idea what on earth I was on about and called my mother in, and my mother apparently eyes raised to heaven. Oh, he's on that again, is he? Because, I just never felt I left, really. When it came to my teenage years, unfortunately I didn't have a particularly happy childhood, and I became what is definitely a wayward teenager, a very wayward teenager, and I was basically on the border of the drug culture in South London at the time, which for those of you who remember your punk rock history, Bromley was a real sort of centre of that. Susie and the Banshees, those of you who know anything about punk rock music. And I was in that world. That was the world I was living in. I was dropping out of school. I went off to, at 16, I decided an apprenticeship with W.H. Smith's in retail management, much to my father's disgust because he had paid for my education at Eltham College. And anyway, so I ended up doing this apprenticeship in retail management. And it taught me two things really, two very important things. One is I wasn't cut out for retail, and the other was I wasn't cut out for management. And I think if you can learn that at 17 years old, that's actually not a bad thing. You know, sometimes the best careers advice is the non-careers advice. But I did learn something else. I was actually reasonably good at dealing with the general public, most of whom ask silly questions. So you're pretty well cut out really for something in the police service. Anyway, through a series of what I now recognise are miracles, although at the time I didn't, I ended up in a youth group at the south end of Bromley High Street at an Assemblies of God church, which I had no idea what one of those was. But what I did know was that 150 young people would gather on a Friday night. And some of these people were what they called Christians, of which I didn't really know what it was, although I had grown up in a church going home. And I'm with these people, and this guy comes a Christian, and there's a punk rock band called The Afflicted. And The Afflicted man is a chap called Steve Hall. And Steve Hall became a Christian. Well, that shook the punk rock world of Bromley, I can tell you. And he came off heroin overnight. He came out, he moved out from living with his girlfriend and the drug den they were living in and everything. Absolutely transformed life. He's now a prison chaplain. And I have to say I was impressed. I was impressed enough to investigate Christianity. And it was probably about the same weekend that I met a fork in the road. I don't know if some people in your life, you have these moments of decision. I had a moment of decision, and it was in Amblecote Road, South East 9, Grove Park, just round from the corner from where Desmond Tutu was a parish priest. And I was parked up in a black Ford Capri, and we were smoking drugs. Now I now know, having been a police officer, that is a road that a police car will drive down every single evening, looking for the car of youngsters smoking drugs. But it didn't happen to me. But I did sit in the back of this car, and as this spliff came round to me, I had this moment where I just said no. And I'm quite proud of that fact, I did, but I now know that it was actually God saying, you need to stop doing this. Anyway, I did. We didn't get arrested, nothing happened. And the youth leader at the church that I just started going to, the chap called Reg Williams, he was a policeman. And he had to deal with a lot of us, my near missus. And he just really their family just took me in and loved me. You know, I was struggling at home, I was wanting to leave home, I had left home possibly about then as well. I was living in different people's living rooms and all this kind of stuff, and this mess was just growing. And it came to this point where I just had this moment where I realised that Christ was the only answer. And that evidence that was in front of me was so palpable with all these young people around me who'd all done this same thing of becoming a Christian, whatever that meant, which I didn't really know, didn't really understand, but I did it. And you know, here I am, however many years later, I was 17, about 40-ish years later, 30-something, and I'm at that position where don't ever underestimate taking people under your wing, you know, and don't underestimate it, doing it to somebody, to the generation behind you, because that's what Reg and Eve Williams did. They were in their 40s and I was 17. Anyway, Reg was a policeman, which was quite interesting, because I said to him, look, I really don't like this, shall I move here? Is this cracking?
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, I'll carry on what you're saying. Anyway, Reg and I had a conversation, because you may remember in April 1984 that a lady called Yvonne Fletcher was murdered outside Living Embassy. Keep your eyes on the prize, because that's all going to court next month, to the High Court. But that impressed me, because in the sense that there was a fact about that in all the horror and all the mess, was the fact that she was too short to be a police officer. She was only 5'2" in the days when ladies had to be 5'4". And I remember saying to Reg, how did she get in?
High heels.
And you might not be wrong, actually. And he actually said, because my problem was I couldn't get in the police service because my eyesight was too poor. And yeah, I decided this is what I want to do. I turned my life around, this is what I wanted to do. And he said, well, just apply. Just apply. She obviously just applied, and they probably looked at the form and thought, cheeky, what's it? Let's interview her. Funny enough, I suspect that's probably what happened to me. I got interviewed and I got in, age 20. Now, if you think I look young now, I was probably a child police officer, really. I was in my 30s before, when I used to stop people in the street, they used to say, are you old enough? It just, I can't help it, you know. Can't help it. But for many, many years, I did look very, very young. And I went to a police station in South London, which unfortunately was in the area I'd grown up in, which wasn't supposed to happen. It was a bit of an administrative error. But I walked in and I just was the golden boy. Everything I touched turned to gold. You know, I had prisoners in a place where you didn't have a lot of arrests because it was a posh area. I was just falling over burglars and robbers and everything. I just couldn't stop arresting people. I got a bit of a reputation for that. And the problem is the reputation is you feel the need to live up to it. And unfortunately, for most of the rest of my career, I wasn't quite so productive. But it was a bit of a golden sort of 3 or 4 months, but it did mean that I got sort of quite well thought of. And as a result, they realised I really shouldn't have been working there because I'd grown up there. So they hoyed me away to the next division along, which is an inner city area, which for a public school boy was an interesting experience and a good experience. It interacted me with people who, from cultures I'd never have otherwise met in my life, and all that kind of stuff that policing in London particularly brings you. But the thing that impressed me most about the police service was its inappropriateness in a ways that I hope you will just take at face value and might find amusing. You know, we always choose the most inappropriate nickname we can possibly think for people. And well, mine, because I was very, very thin, I walked through the door and a bloke called Derek Acton, he said, "Where are you from?" "Belson," because I was so thin. Now that isn't funny, but in the police context, that's funny. And that's when you tell jokes about police service, you think, actually, this isn't very funny. But it was quite interesting because it made you realise that this was quite a tough environment. We were going to deal with blood and gore and mess and detritus of people's lives. And some of the ways some of them dealt with this was like that. And I'm wading in as this Christian thinking, well, I've just been given a really inappropriate nickname that really is not funny. But actually, how do I now deal with this as a Christian? What do I do? Do I say to people, actually, I'd rather you didn't call me that? You know? Because you could alienate yourself very, very quickly. Or do you just have to live by example? And I think the thing I learned from the 30 years in the police service was when you get those moments where you think, I really don't like this isn't funny, and I'm not going to... Because everybody else thought it was funny. You know? You can see why they've stopped people having nicknames in the police service. I was standing there thinking, I'm going to have to live out my Christian life by example. And that was actually quite a tough call because I got born again into a lively church. We were telling everybody about everything. And I actually had to learn that sort of take a back seat and let your life do the talking. And one thing I did also learn about police services is its ability to drink. And whiskey particularly. And my two reporting skippers in my probation, Pat Healy and Martin Whittaker. And when I passed my probation, it's sort of traditional that you give your skipper a bottle of scotch. You know, that's the idea. So I gave him a bottle of scotch each, and that was at 10 o'clock at night. And we were on what's called a quick changeover. We were on again at 6 o'clock the following morning. And when I turned up at work at 6 o'clock the following morning, it appeared that Martin and Pat had not got home. But both bottles of whiskey were actually empty. And somehow this was my fault, which I couldn't quite work out. I was accused of, you gave me the bottles of whiskey, what did you expect to happen? Anyway, it turns out that Martin was due in court that morning. So he had to be propped up, stuck on a bicycle, with the case papers in his rucksack and off to court. And off he goes to court. The next thing we know, we've got a phone call from a member of the public saying, I don't know what's happened, but I've got somebody in my skip. and there's a bicycle nearby. And he says he's a policeman, but he's very drunk. Can you come and help? So here's Martin. So we cart him off to court. We put the bicycle somewhere. Then he gets to court, and of course he hasn't got the case papers, has he? Because they come off in his ability to wrap this thing around the skip. So off we have to go back, and fortunately we found the case papers in the front garden. But somehow all that was my fault. Age 22, I had gotten drunk. But it was a funny world. It was the way we socialised, the way we sort of relaxed. And a lot of people look at camaraderie and where camaraderie comes from. And as a Christian, I had to face a choice. What do I get involved in this or don't I? And I became the art of the one pointer. I'll come and have a pint with you, but I'm not stopping. And actually, I found that balance actually was okay. And I think most guys that I ever worked with, who I respected, actually, went with that. But you mentioned Cressida Dick earlier. She was my duty officer at Peckham when she was an inspector. And she and a couple of other governors I had over my time in the police, whatever you see or hear said about Cressida, she has an ability in leadership to know who every single person is. And that is a gift I do not have. And if she walked in this room now, she would know me, she would know where she'd worked with me, she would know a story or two about me, everything. And that is an ability. She's a people person. And I placed a bet in 1994, a 50 quid bet that she'd be the first female commissioner.
Wow.
Because I could see it in her then. The problem is it's such a politicised role that the Cressida Dick you may think you know is not the one I know. And I'll tell you something without fear of anybody arguing this one with me, because if this was the Peckham reunion, we get 100% vote on this one. Is if Cressida Dick can't sort out the mess that the Metropolitan Police is in, it shows you how much political interference there is in policing. Just left her alone when she was appointed in 2017, it would be back being, in my opinion, the greatest police service in the world. But that's the level of interference, plus a few bumps along the way of her, not of her own making. Let me just see where I've got to, because I'm just conscious I haven't even looked at my watch yet. Okay.
You've got 10 minutes.
Okay. We did get in trouble with Cressida once. I'll tell you a funny story about her, because she was very good. We used to water bomb people. Just to explain, there's a sort of initiation rites when you're on a new probation. It doesn't happen nowadays because apparently it's bullying. We used to fill big Metropolitan Police property bags with water, and we used to go up on the 5th floor of the Peckham Market, down below which, before the days of mobile phones, there was a public phone box. So the probationer walking the high street would be told, yeah, there's what's called an abandoned call, which is where somebody's dialed 999 but hasn't then spoken when the call's been collected from the phone box Rye Lane Junction with Blackpool Road. Conveniently for us. Anyway, so as you can imagine, the probationer turns up and all the water gets dropped on them, which is just a bit of a jolly bit of fun. Except when, at the same time you all just let go, call comes out on the radio to a burglary happening out at the other end of the ground. So you all have to run down the fire escape, get in the police cars, off you go, and you're all patting yourselves on the back because you got 3 burglars, because we caught them in the act, you see. Next night we come in and you're expecting Cressida to walk in and say, well done lads, well done last night, that was brilliant. Face like thunder. It's like, oh dear, what have we done? Because we're all like naughty schoolboys, because I'm the oldest one and I'm about 26, you know. And we're all saying, what have we done, what have we done, what have we done? Anyway, she walks in and she said, the next time you lot want to water bomb people off the Rye Lane Market, just remember to pick the property bags up before you go off to catch the burglars. But well done for catching the burglars. So she's very good. She's very good, in fairness. The thing I remember about the police service most of all, I mean, I can tell, I've got hundreds of stories I can tell. The thing is that it survives on its camaraderie and its humour, and some of it's inappropriate, like my nickname, and some of it is probably these days not considered the right thing to do, like dropping water bombs on probationers. But actually, you need that bonding with people. And I think where people say, oh, where's the police lost its way a bit? I think it's lost its way in an awful lot of ways. But one of them is it's lost the ability to bond. you're not part of a team in the way you used to be part of a team. And I think they need to work out how to recapture that. I can charge consultancy fees if I want to give them a hand, but I don't think they'll pay me at 300 odd miles away. But I think that's what they've got to do. But the thing I did learn a lot of in the police service was I came across drugs a lot. You won't police Peckham for very long before drugs really is almost every day. At Peckham you would bank on having at least one arrest a day. That was our life. And you realise the gun culture that goes with it, you realise the gang culture that goes with it, and all the mess that is the drugs world. And it taught me something that I suspect some guys in this room, you've been in business. You've been businessmen. And even if you haven't, I'm sure you can imagine. If you came up with a policy in 1971 in your business, and it wasn't working 50 years later, you change the policy, wouldn't you? Yeah? Well, guys, you may not realise, but the Misuse of Drugs Act, which controls all our drugs policing, is 1971. And it didn't work the day the ink was dry on it. So why have we not done something? I'm not telling you, I'm not even going to go into a discussion about the answers. I've got lots of opinions and views on my side of it from what I've dealt with. But that doesn't work. And if you want to see why it doesn't work, up the road in Hexham, you may know, there's a Christian organisation called Betel.
Yeah.
Now, my wife and I have been involved in Betel for many, many, many years, and we work there on a Friday, and that's our high point of the week, really. Going and seeing what God can do to transform the lives of men and women whose lives have been absolutely wrecked. I do recommend that any day in the future you have this breakfast, if you want one of them to come along and give them your story, and just talk to me, because one or two of them, their testimony will absolutely floor you. Because they'll tell you about the mess, and it might give you a greater understanding if it's not something you've experienced about the mess. But it'll also give you will walk out of here with, I guarantee, with the knowledge that only Christ can solve this. There is no other solution. And that's what Betel teaches. And that's why, strangely, not strangely, it is the most successful drug rehabilitation centre in the United Kingdom. Full stop, new sentence. They've got the figures to prove it. So, it's on all sorts of levels. Malcolm and I were talking earlier about training, how important training people is. A lot of these guys come in no skills at all. No skills whatsoever. Dropped out of education at 14, system hasn't picked up on them, ended up being a drug runner, got into drugs themselves, usual story. Can't read and write. How can somebody who leaves school at 14 in our society not read and write? Well, that's a big question that I can't answer. But I can answer is I can teach them to read and write. And you can teach them to read and write. Or if you've got a skill in carpentry, or if you've got a skill in anything, it doesn't really matter what it is. These guys just want to learn because they know that the transformation of them spiritually is done by Christ alone. Strangely, he gives the transformation of their day-to-day life to his disciples, to you and me. And it might not be something you do directly. We're not all called to do it. But actually, just by going into the cafe in Hexham and accepting that most of the women that are working there probably wouldn't work in a cafe normally, so it's not going to be the greatest service, possibly. But actually, you're supporting a charity that takes no money off the government. Takes no money off, other than COVID. They have had a couple of COVID grants. They take no money off the government. And as a result of that, it's edgy stuff. Because they're relying on the businesses that all the guys and girls have to work in to keep the lights on, along with one or two generous benefactors. I won't pretend that doesn't happen as well. But it's taught me that our drugs policy in this country does not work, and policing taught me that as well. So, one thing that I always remember about drugs policing is, you search the prisoner, you do all that, and you put them in the cell and you clang the door shut. Now, you do have to slam a cell door. The lock is based upon the fact it needs to slam for the hammer to go home. You don't do it just to annoy the prisoner. Okay? You genuinely don't. And I remember as a young policeman standing, having slammed the door on one side of the cell door, and there's this guy on the other side of the cell door, and both of us realised that what's going on here is hopeless. Because I'm not solving his drug problem, and he's lost his drugs that he needs. So we've got to come up with something better than this, haven't we? And at the moment, I don't know what we're going to do, because we don't seem to have the will to address that, but there we are. But guys, places like Betel are addressing it. They're addressing it from a Christian perspective. And, I'm proud to be part of them. And if you need any furniture, the shop's open. If you need any cafe, whatever, gardens do, they do all sorts of business. Anyway, that was the serious bit. Let's just go back to a bit more. It's been a lot of fun. Wrong piece of paper. Royal weddings always produce an ability for a bit of humour, particularly where Americans are involved. Any Americans in the room before I tell any American jokes? No, okay, that's fine. And also people who don't really realise what's going on. And I was at the William and Kate's wedding, right underneath Big Ben, and it got to the point where public aren't allowed to cross the route because you've got to keep the area sterile for terrorism, threat, blah blah blah. And this bloke, he's very bleary-eyed. This isn't the American story. I'll tell you the American story. Like very bleary-eyed, comes up to me. He's obviously just finished a night shift. He said, I need to get over to the tube station. He said, what's going on? I said, oh, obviously you haven't heard, there's a royal wedding today. He says, oh no, it's not today, is it? And off he goes. But there we are, you do. But the Americans, then, they think a royal wedding is fantastic, because of course they did away with royalty, didn't they? And they think it's fantastic. Funnily enough, the French are some of the most enthusiastic at royal weddings. And the Nigerians get dressed up to the nines to go and line the route at the royal wedding. I think it's brilliant. Anyway, these Americans turn up. I'm standing right under Big Ben. Officer, can you tell us where Big Ben is? Because I have been wound up by my mates before. I think that it's inside that tower. So it's the bell. Oh, gee, can we get it? Can we photograph it? I said, no, you can't get inside there, but you can photograph the outside. Oh, thank you very much, officer. And they said, click their photographs. They want you in the photograph. There must be 1 million photographs all over the world. And they said, officer, that's really great. We want to do some more culture. Can you tell us the way to Stonehenge? I said, well, apparently, according to my colleague, I said, I think it's that way. On the London Marathon, the best way to have Americans was I was standing right next to a sign, big yellow sign, this big, for the runner's benefit, 200 metres to finish. Okay? 200 metres to finish. Officer, we want to see some of these guys coming across the line. Can you tell us how far it is to finish, please? I'm told I took a step back and looked. I said, I'm not sure, but I think, because of course Americans don't stop them. But they're always good for a bit of a laugh. But so what do I do now? I haven't really told anything about vehicle forensics. Oh, that's a bit of a... Right, very quickly. My main job in the last 15 years was crash cars that kill people, murder inquiries, all that kind of stuff. And finding the detail, because I'm fascinated by detail. And to illustrate the kind of thing I look for, is my last job was the Westminster Bridge terror attack in 2017, where I'm one of the blokes in a white suit on the bridge doing my thing. And you might not realise it, but from Parliament Square to St Thomas's Roundabout is a mile. It's a long bridge, and Bridge Street, including Bridge Street. But. Well, hands and knees, when you're 50 and you're retiring in 3 months, trying to find something is a challenge. So I'm on my hands and knees, I'm doing my thing, and what I'm looking for is a mark on the tarmac that's about that big, about 2 inches long. And it's a mark that's left. If you're hit by a car, you leave a burn mark on the road surface because your shoe is accelerated to the speed of the car, and it leaves a fractional burn mark. And it's very difficult to see. Sometimes you can only see it in one direction. Sometimes you only see it if it's not raining. Sometimes you can only see it if it is raining. But it's what you're looking for. And one reason I'm looking for that is because that mark tells me that the bus driver could have done nothing. Because I was dealing with a woman who'd gone under the bus in the middle of the bridge, who'd lost her life because of that. And what mattered to the bus driver, I didn't know that, but I knew it would matter to him because I'd done enough policing, is that he will be asking himself, could I have done anything to stop driving over that woman? And my job is to find the evidence that helps him answer that question. Because we've shot the terrorist dead, so we're not going to be going to the courts, are we? So I'm looking for this mark, because the thing I always learn about policing is you need to care enough about the victim, and you need to care enough about the witnesses. Because they're traumatised too. Well, obviously the victim, in my context, the witness. And what had happened was the terrorist had driven into her, and she had actually, we don't think he made much contact with her, because she had stepped back. As she stepped back, she overbalanced on the curb and then fell into the road and went under the bus. If I can't find the mark. But if I can find the mark, it's actually on the pavement on the road, the pavement's still tarmac, I can prove that the car's hit her. And then the bus driver has got absolutely no liability at all, does he? Not that he has liability, but he will think he has. Of course, I'm on my hands and knees, road, pavement, a lot. Finally, after 2 hours, I find this mark. And it's all in the detail. That's the kind of stuff I used to do. It's like finding a fibre the size of, not even the size of an unshaven hair, in the wheel arch of a car to prove a murder victim has been murdered by that wheel. Even after the suspect has taken the car, 2 days, he's resprayed the car and he's jet washed it. I still found it. That's the kind of stuff I used to be involved in. It's the kind of stuff I now do privately, for negotiable rates when needs any assistance. But I hope I've given you a bit of a sort of picture of the world that I've lived and worked in. Probably you may have expected more jokes. I've got plenty, but we run out of time. You have to invite me back if you want to. I think you've probably also seen a bit aside the policing, some of the inappropriateness, but actually it's the way people deal with stuff. And if there's a praying group of men, you want to pray for police officers, pray for how they deal with stuff. Because there's a lot of stuff out there that without Christ they don't know how to deal with. I'm privileged that for 30 years I served as a Christian. And I will admit to you, to a room full of police officers, I would admit I couldn't have done it without Christ. And that's the thought I'd like to leave you with, is you can't do it without Christ. And that's what you need to be praying for. When you see police officers in the street, that's what they need. Thanks very much, gentlemen. If there's any questions,
I know you went through, I was in the fire brigade.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So to a lesser extent, I know it's the camaraderie and the black humour is what sees you through a lot of situations, especially what they used to call road traffic accidents, when they're called collisions, don't they?
Yeah.
And when you go to that, and you see little kids who have been hit by somebody who's made one or two glasses of falling down water too many, and then they don't realise, but of course, but yeah, I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
Betel is a wonderful organisation.
Yeah. I've got a receptive audience to Betel, that's good. It's my passion, so yes, hello.
I'll pick up on that last point as well. What you were saying about inappropriate behaviour, puerile behaviour even.
Childish,
Yeah,
yes.
childish stuff. When I was a student, I did some vacation work in the mental hospitals we had in those days, where you lock people away out of public sight, and the staff there would indulge in such things, inappropriate jokes, totally politically incorrect, and it's just a response to being in a situation you can't control, isn't it? And I think isn't that really what's behind all of that?
Yeah, I mean,
I think
alcohol's the big feature. I think is what concerned me.
There's got to be some form of escapism, and if it's harmless escapism, if it is really harmless, of just puerile behaviour rather than the drinking, which is harmful,
I mean,
then I think we just have to be a bit more sympathetic.
I think we do. I mean, at Peckham, there was the internal tannoy used to go at about 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, and all you would hear over the tannoy was, "The Eagle has landed, the Eagle has landed," and all that meant was in Sergeant Jim Clemence's office, the whiskey bottles were open and all were welcome. and that was the way guys dealt with it. And then, at 10 o'clock at night, I'd come on for night duty to a half-cut police station of mainly supervisors. The PCs were still out on the street doing the stuff. And yeah, can you take Whiskey Mac home? That was his name. I did not know Chief Inspector McFarlane's real name for a long time. I knew he lived near the Chinese roundabout in Beckenham, for those of you who might know it. But I got asked to take him home. So I literally poured him into the back of the police car, drove him to where I thought he lived. He pointed at a particular front door. 2 a.m. by now, I'm knocking on this front door. Mrs. McFarlane's not impressed. And I get it. So whenever whiskey's involved, I'm in trouble, but I haven't drunk it. And she's there. And anyway, long story short, next day I go in, and he's looking very chastened in his office, and I walk past Charlie, give him 2 bottles of malt across the table, more whiskey. And he said, I'm very sorry, Mrs. McFarlane spoke to you last night. He said, but for goodness sake, next time remember the key is under the plant pot. But it's the way guys dealt with it. And the problem is today they will be using similar different ways. Christ alone. Christ alone, I hope, is found.
Yeah.
You know, I was listening to that on the way here. But yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I'd like to just do another plug for the Rising Cafe. For those of you who haven't been in Hexham, to see changed lives in action, to see the expression on these girls' faces. Some of them have been prostitutes, have been all sorts of things. And it's just amazing. Betel is a fantastic organisation.
If you have a piece of cake in there, although actually Joanna's just come off baking, she does the main cooking. But the lady who did the baking for the 2 years up till now that it's been open, 2 or 3 years it's been open, when she came to Betel as a drug addict, she could not do beans on toast. And talk about training, they took her down to the one at, I think it's the one at Lincoln, they took her to Coventry, where they've got a cafe. And they taught her to bake. She came back, you should see the cakes. The cakes are unbelievable. You know.
I really recommend anybody who's not been.
Yeah, too big, yeah. Ask for a doggy bag, take the other bit home, have it
And the
twice.
service is second to none.
And I think the thing is there, they deliberately try to staff it so they've got enough people in there so that you can ask them their story. So if you take somebody in with you who is not a Christian, you have a non-Christian friend that you're taking along, take them to the Rising Cafe, get your waitress to tell their story. That's my bit of advice to you, because the testimony is unbelievable.
And they're quite happy to admit where they.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's one girl, Steph, where I left something there, some change somewhere, and I went back and I said, I think I've left my purse on the side or something. She said, well, you wouldn't have seen that in my days gone by.
She was a heroin addict for 20 years. Wouldn't believe it, would you? Yes, sorry.
I'm intrigued by your comment about your golden 3 months.
Yes.
It just seems to me that's a philosophy that's a bit of a danger. Were you thinking that would enhance your career, or was there a danger of it making you over zealous?
No, I think it made me think I was better at this than I thought I was, and that was my danger. I was a bit embarrassed by it because clearly everybody thought I was some sort of the new kid on the block who was going to solve everything, and I wasn't. I was 20. I couldn't stop falling over people who'd just done a burglary, just done this, just done that. It just was one of them things. But I think I struggled at training school. I struggled in the pretend environment, and I actually didn't think I was good enough to do the job. And I think it was one way of actually reversing that balance. Was I just, it's quite straightforward. Policing is actually quite straightforward in its, in how it's done. You just need to go out there and have the confidence to do it. And whenever I taught recruits, I used to say, so this is a confidence trick.
So what happened, Charlie, when you moved from being a copper on the beat to the forensic stuff? I mean, that.
Right, the transition for that very quickly was as soon as I pitched up in the police service, I'm completely bonkers about motorbikes and cars as well, but motorbikes really. And I thought, well, where in the police can you ride a motorbike, get paid to ride a motorbike? When the Met, there's 3 choices. There's traffic division, wasn't really that traffic-y orientated, to be honest. There was the special escort group, all of whom are ex-traffic. So that was, and then there's surveillance. Well, at this height on a motorbike, I am not going to blend in. So there's no way surveillance was ever going to be my thing. So I'm going to become a traffic policeman and to ride motorbikes, which I did. And I had a very, very enjoyable career riding motorbikes and getting paid to do it. But within that, obviously, you're dealing with all the serious fatal road accidents and all that kind of stuff. So that got me into, with my mechanical background, I really didn't go into, but I got into that. And clearly, found an aptitude for something I was reasonably good at. And then just went slowly worked through the system, and ended up in what was then called the Forensic Investigation Unit, very fancy title. and used to get called out. Basically, mainly fatal road traffic accidents was our big thing, and murder scenes and terrorism. Was our other two. So yeah, not glamorous, but very, very satisfying. Very satisfying. When you're at the old, my last job, a murder trial, I was in the witness box for 5 3/4 hours at the Old Bailey. Now you average normally 2 hours in the witness box as an expert witness. That was 3 times longer than usual. But we won, and that's all I care about. You know, justice prevailed. Not we won, justice prevailed. So there we are. Any other questions? I think there was one other person hand up here.
One observation. In my younger days, I got involved in forensic work, mainly in Medway and Maidstone area.
Okay.
I often get called up to Maidstone Morgue to x-ray someone who was charged with being burned.
Right.
Found in the boot of a car, and you had to find out whether they were murdered, how they were killed. The stench was absolutely unbelievable, and you had to wear this with some this stuff under your nose and wear a mask and things like that. And you're busy x-raying, and 2 policemen come in eating bacon sandwiches. We're talking about inappropriateness, you know, and making inappropriate remarks about the thing. It's not. It is interesting, but I found that a bit quite.
I think it's the problem is the daily basis of dealing with it in a non-sanitised. I mean, a morgue is a relatively sanitised environment, and I think you just have to. It is about dealing with stuff. We all deal with it differently, and as I said, I come back to. I'm not trying to be super holy here, but you know, these guys have no other outlet. They can't walk outside and say, "Lord, I just need your help dealing with this," because they don't know the Saviour. So, you know, that's not a prayer they can pray. Well, they can pray, but you know, do you know what I mean? It is difficult, and yeah, we're not covered in glory with some of our dealings. But you know, I mean, at Peckham, you deal with so much in a week. They reckon that 5 years service at Peckham is the equivalent to 30 years service in any county force. And having done it, I can agree with that.
Especially trotters as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there was plenty of them. Anyway, John.
Well, Charlie, sorry, your title was "It's been a lot of fun." It's been a lot of fun here this morning, hearing you speak. So thank you very much indeed for your fascinating story. Really great. And thank you very much for coming. So next month, sorry that we haven't any promotional leaflets. That's not Max's fault. It's just that we didn't get the information in time to print it off for next month. But it's 27th, I think, of November, the last Saturday in November, as usual. And our speaker is Alex Duncan. Some of you may have heard Alex. So he's coming next for the next meeting. Some of you will know, if you know him, will know that he's a medic, and he's been operating overseas, doing some fantastic work, training work in some very remote parts of the world, like Afghanistan and Pakistan and places. So really looking forward to seeing Alex next time. So come along, and still a few spare seats. Invite your friends. It'd be good to have a few more next month. So thank you very much indeed, gentlemen.
Thanks,